And let's go ahead and get started. We have plenty to talk about today. So welcome to Monday afternoon Coping with COVID session. This is the third week we've been doing this. So for some of you, this is very familiar and old hat, and a huge welcome to those of you who are joining for the first time. A quick reminder, you will get an email link to the video after this, as well as a copy of the slides to go through sort of at your leisure. So no pressure at all if we're going through some of this information quickly. The way we've been structuring this is basically welcoming everyone in and taking questions that people have submitted in advance. I'll go through some highlights and respond to some of the updates and provide some current information, as current as we have it, and then go through and answer the questions one by one. And then we have a little bit of extra, I'm going to call it bonus content at the end, about sort of stepping back and kind of remembering where we are and sort of getting a handle of everything as we're going through this, because it's really easy to get stuck in the details. And this is a moment where we've been in the weeds and in the details for a bit. So it's okay if we maybe exhale and step back a little bit now that we are, you know, half a week into April and paying attention to all sorts of good things. I have a message here. Totally fine leaving your video off if you want to do that. Totally fine to mute yourself. Totally fine to chat me. I'm going to keep an eye on that. And totally fine to pick up this content later if that works for you. I am all about supporting yourself and doing what you need this week especially, because the adrenaline rush from the initial crisis mode response has waned a little bit. And now I think people are moving more and more into kind of processing some of the trauma associated with this, and we want to make sure that you are taking care of yourself and doing whatever you need to do. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Elaine. It's lovely to meet you. I am a CPA with a personal financial specialist designation and an accredited financial counselor. And I get to work with artists and arts organizations all over the country, helping support the business and financial side of what they do. I do want to acknowledge right from the outset that this world is changing very, very quickly. This is the third weekly session we've done, and each week so far we've learned a little bit more and gotten a little bit more clarity, and that will continue happening. So what I'm saying today is accurate, but more guidance could come out tomorrow that sort of tweaks everything. So definitely acknowledge that this is an evolving situation, and lots of groups and individuals are trying to do the best we can to answer questions as quickly as we can, but know that this is just for educational purposes. So what are we doing is basically what we've been doing for the past couple of weeks. We'll go through some relevant updates, and then I will answer the questions that people submitted ahead of time. Thank you for those. That helps me gain so much clarity around what maybe your concerns are, or the things you really want to talk about. And then, of course, we are here to provide some support for each other. I wanted to sort of take us back to some of the things I've been repeating on a pretty regular basis. If there are sort of 3 ground rules to keep in mind, the first and most important one is to do the math. Keep paying attention to your account balances, keep planning for cash flow, keep an eye on what's coming in and what's going out. When it comes to your expenses, we want to make sure we are minimizing them as much as possible. Definitely asking for flexibility where there's room for flexibility, and checking for any loan payment terms that may have changed. When it comes to maximizing your income, obviously, if you have a steady source of income, I think that's amazing. Let's keep that going as long as possible. We'll also talk about some creative ways of adapting your work to the current environment, and also maybe talk about some phrasing to ask for some community support and see what that looks like. And it's also worth acknowledging that if that's not where you are right now and you are not making work, and that is just fine. You do not have to be making work right now. You need to be taking care of yourself and taking care of others. And as we balance paying attention to the math and minimizing your expenses and maximizing your income, we want to make sure you're doing that through the lens of self-care, because at some point this will end, and we all need to make sure we're in a position to return to making work when you're feeling ready and able. And if you're someone who is making the most incredible work that you're feeling moved to make right now, keep doing that too, because that's also okay. So the emergency support is still falling into kind of these three major buckets. The stimulus money is the first bucket. That is that $1,200 payment per person that is coming out through the tax system. Again, if your adjusted gross income is above $75,000, you start seeing that amount of stimulus check go down. If your adjusted gross income is above $100,000, your stimulus money goes away completely. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Most of the individuals I'm looking at or I'm working with are expecting to receive their full stimulus payment. That is coming out through the tax system, and it's going to follow the direct deposit instructions the IRS has on file for you, probably from your 2019 or your 2018 tax return. Now, if you have not filed in 2019 or 2018, my advice and the advice from the IRS has been to go ahead and file. I know there are some individuals that may not have filed for whatever reason. Go ahead and do that so you can kind of be in the queue to receive this stimulus check. There is one big exception to that the IRS clarified last week. If you haven't filed your tax return because your only source of income is Social Security, you do not have to worry about filing a tax return. You can just relax because the IRS will share your stimulus payment with you in the same way they disperse your Social Security payment to you, generally via direct deposit. Sometimes, and over the past couple of weeks, people have been asking for clarity around what to do if the IRS doesn't have direct deposit instructions on hand for them. That is okay. You will be receiving a paper check. The IRS clarified that they will be sending out paper checks if you did not provide direct deposit or account information along with your tax return from the past 2 years. That's okay. You will get it. It just might take a while. So be patient. It will come, but it's going to be a minute. I will also go ahead and acknowledge and share with you that we are seeing an increase in identity theft scams, which often happens associated with tax returns, and it almost always happens when there's a lot of chaos going around. And as you've probably noticed, there's a lot of chaos going on right now. So please continue to use your best judgment. No one from the IRS is going to call you or ask for your account information or your Social Security number over the phone. Definitely be very judicious in responding to questions. There are lots and lots of scams out there, which is sort of atrocious for a long list of reasons, but definitely keep your skepticism hat on firmly on your head as you're going through this. So those stimulus checks will be coming in the next couple of weeks. And for a lot of people, that's going to be some relief. The next big bucket of relief that is available for individuals is unemployment insurance. And I'm going to lead this conversation with an apology because, as you know, unemployment is dispersed at the state level. And every single state is managing this a little bit differently. Some are managing it really, really well, and they're being very responsive and updating frequently asked questions all the time, and other states are not. So if you live in a state where you're feeling a little hung out to dry, I am very, very sorry, because I know that's adding to the stress and it's adding to the confusion, and it's really tough. I can tell you though, individuals are working on this, and the individuals that are working for the unemployment offices at the state level are trying their best to process everything behind the scenes using brand new systems that were not necessarily built to accommodate self-employed individuals or these pandemic payments. And they're doing it all remotely while they're also juggling their own health concerns and family issues and all the things like that. So be patient. I know that's not great advice. I know it's really frustrating. And I know that for some of you, this is a big difference maker, but definitely be patient. In general, if we could just kind of step back a smidge, what we are seeing is that as you are filling out these applications and the paperwork, it's helpful if you have a general understanding of how unemployment normally works in that particular state. And the reason I say that is because that can help you answer the questions in the context of your own reality. So let's say, for example, you know that in your state, the unemployment office looks at weekly earnings, and they look at it over a, say, 1 year period. We know in the arts, you don't have weekly earnings. You have high seasons and low seasons, and things are sort of crazy. And it's always unclear how your information lines up. But if you know they're trying to get to an average weekly earnings amount, maybe you look at, say, your tax return from last year and say, okay, what did I earn for the year? What is that divided by 52 weeks? It is imperfect, but that might be a good estimate of your weekly earnings that could help you answer the question to the best of your ability. And then that way, the information can continue on through, and those who work in the unemployment offices can adjust it as needed. Also, there is an additional $600 per week that has been made available above and beyond what the normal unemployment amount is. States have a lot of discretion about what to do with this, though, right? Not all states are giving all of it to every individual that is applying. So this is another thing to sort of dig into as you're going into this application. For the individuals who have started receiving unemployment plus that $600, that is giving them a whole lot of breathing room. And I heard anecdotally this morning from someone I was speaking to that some individuals plus the $600 were actually making more than what they normally earned in the arts, which was giving them quite a bit of breathing room right now to kind of exhale and remember to take care of themselves and not be quite so stressed about money. So know what your state is doing with respect to this additional $600 amount, because again, that can be really helpful. That could continue through the end of July, FYI. Also, almost all states have suspended the requirement that you need to be actively looking for work in order to continue to claim unemployment, which is good. Many states have also extended unemployment from 26 weeks to 39 weeks, which is good. That $600 won't necessarily continue for the full 39-week period. That extra ends after July 31st, but the unemployment period can continue a bit longer. So again, to recap, I am sorry. I know this is frustrating for many individuals, but step back, think through what unemployment would look like in a normal world right now, and try to answer the questions to the best of your ability for your state. This is a resource from the Indiana Department of Workforce Development. This is an example where this is a frequently asked question from normal unemployment times, right? And the example they give here is that someone's total wages in the base period, which is 4 quarters leading up to the period of unemployment, was $30,000. Then the unemployment benefit would be $30,000 divided by 52. Again, that's getting to that weekly amount. And you'll notice they're using the gross wages of $30,000 here, not $30,000 minus any other expenses, right? So gross wages is really going to be what you're wanting to pay attention to. And then in Indiana, you're eligible for 47% of your weekly wage. So for this individual, it's $30,000 divided by 52 weeks. That's $577 a week times 0.47. So that gets to $271 is the weekly benefit amount. So if you're going through the support on Indiana's website and you see that maybe there still aren't questions specifically addressing your situation as a freelancer or a contract worker or a self-employed gig musician or individual, if you can say, okay, let me look at what I earned for a year, get that to a weekly amount, then apply this 47% and see where I would end up, that might not be a terrible option for you. I will also say, I was on the Texas website earlier today. Texas has a flow chart that gives some additional information to individuals who have already applied or have already exhausted their benefits. And what Texas is saying, again, if you do not live in Texas, this does not apply to you. But what Texas is saying is if you are already in the system, hang tight. Texas will be in touch with you. And that's really helpful for people who are wondering the status of their application and what's happening and what's going on where. Texas is saying, relax, we will be in touch. If you are a new applicant, though, whether you are a non-traditional applicant, so that's someone who is self-employed or a freelance worker or a contract worker, or all of a sudden you had not previously applied for benefits and now you need them, that's where you go ahead and apply online. Texas has even taken this one step further, as have other states, to identify days of the week and or blocks of time that they recommend individuals call. Texas's is based on the last name of the applicant. So if your last name starts with a G, for example, the best time for you to call might be Monday afternoon between 12 and 4 or something like that, right? So some states are trying to manage the volume of contact from individuals based on systems like that. Again, if you live in one state that's doing that, try to follow that as much as possible. And these websites, if you are applying for unemployment, will become your new best friend. And you will start seeing regular updates being posted and frequently asked questions being addressed. And again, to the best of your ability, step back, figure out how unemployment is calculated in your state under normal circumstances, and then do your best to go ahead and provide the information that would best approximate that for your situation. There's a question in the chat where someone says that they never really got to make money in their creative pursuit because the pandemic happened. So how would they figure out their weekly salary? This is a great question. It depends on the state. So if the state is asking you to submit your most recent tax return or something, right, they would maybe look at that to calculate. But if you are in a state where they are asking you to estimate what your salary would have been, then you can think about, if you don't have a whole lot of history, you can think about, okay, well, I was pretty sure I would have these weekly gigs going on, and on average, it could be approximately $300 a week or $200 a week or something like that. I would encourage you, if you are taking those steps to estimate your own average salary, and it's not based on several years of history or really strong information you have, then I would encourage you to document that pretty carefully and probably expect to have a conversation with someone from the unemployment office at some point, just to make sure that what you are reporting is in line with what they want you to be reporting. I would also say check to see within your state. I think this questioner is from Pennsylvania. So check with the state of Pennsylvania to see if there are any frequently asked questions or any resources that speak to that situation particularly. This is for someone who's maybe just getting started running a business. There's another question here about, are there any disadvantages to applying for unemployment benefits? In other words, if one applies now and receives benefits, does it come out of future Social Security or other future benefits? That's a great question. My understanding at this point is no, it does not. There could be trade-offs. If you are someone who runs a small business that could be eligible for small business assistance through the SBA, and we'll talk about some of these in a second. Usually that application for, say, the PPP, the Payroll Protection Plan, would preclude you from applying for unemployment. But if that's not the route you're comfortable with and unemployment feels good to you, you should be okay, especially now. Another question in the chat says, this person is regularly trying and keeps getting a "this site can't be reached" notice every time they enter information. I am so sorry. I understand that the state's website is regularly overwhelmed, and it sounds like that is norm for you right now. You might want to think about maybe super early in the morning or maybe even overnight hours, trying to see if there might be a little less volume and you might be able to get through. But that's incredibly frustrating, and I'm really sorry that you're having to deal with it. I also see your question about the fact that you do work all over the country and travel to different places. The general advice right now has been apply in the state where you live, right? Because that's where your permanent tax home is. This is all a little new and different since independent contractors do regularly travel to various places and may have had income from various places. I'd keep the focus on your home state right now. I see you are in a state that is close to other states. So there's a chance that, let's say your example is maybe you live in Cincinnati, but you work in Louisville. There could be some weird tweaks there or quirks where if your job has you in one state, but you live in another state, there could be some interesting things to explore. But if in general, you're talking about just occasional travel to other places, you really want to keep the focus on your home state for purposes of unemployment. Okay, unemployment. I'm sorry. I am really sorry. I know this is frustrating. I know it's frustrating. And the added stress of the time pressure is making it even worse, but it's going to be okay. It really is. And then think about how much information you'll be able to share with others if they have to go through something similar. Okay, I'm switching gears now to talk about the small business program and the small business administration assistance. There are two programs that have gotten a lot of attention, particularly in the past week or so. This Paycheck Protection Program, PPP is what we're calling it, does enable self-employed and contractors to apply for this to maintain their salary. Again, we're thinking about the average amount you earn on a regular basis. What's good about this particular program is that this loan is forgivable. A forgivable loan is one you do not have to pay back, right? Sometimes under normal circumstances, that would count as taxable income to you if it was a loan that was forgiven that has been waived for purposes of this PPP program, right? So this forgivable loan means you do not have to pay it back as long as you meet certain requirements. Those requirements include that you are eligible for it, which means you are self-employed or an employer with 500 or fewer people that work for you, which most of the organizations and individuals I work with fall well within that. And then of the funds you receive, 75% of them have to be spent on payroll, and you have to maintain payroll at a comparable level to what it was before the COVID-19 crisis happened, right? So you cannot take the funds and then cut everyone's salary by 50% and still retain access to this, right? So when I mentioned in response to the question earlier, is PPP better or is unemployment better, right? It just kind of depends. If you live in a state where you're looking at your average income and for unemployment purposes, half of it would be replaced through unemployment and there's no $600 bonus in your state, depending on what your average salary is, it might be better for you to think about a PPP option where you could retain 100% of your salary. You wouldn't get the $600, but you would get 100% of your salary through this forgivable loan. So it's really a matter of kind of doing the math to see what makes the most sense for you. Clarifying question in the chat. If you are self-employed and the only employee, does that apply to just that one salary? That is correct. And if you are self-employed, so maybe you are a sole proprietor, maybe you have your own LLC, you are not paying yourself a salary, right? You're just running your business in the way you've always been running your business, right? For purposes of this PPP program, you count, and your average weekly earnings do count as your payroll. So you could go ahead and apply for this. And again, the AICPA and other groups are strongly advocating for everyone to look at gross wages, not gross wages minus all of your ordinary and necessary business expenses, right? So for purposes of this, for self-employed individuals, we're really looking at that top line average earnings number per week. Okay, excellent. Gratitude in the chat. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. So that's this PPP program. Now I will say the banks that have been dealing with this have been totally overwhelmed. And a lot of individuals who started applying for this on Friday got really frustrated because the application wasn't working and it wasn't loading. And some banks were even saying, hold on, we're not going to participate in this. So like with all of this, it's evolving and there are definitely frustrations that are still happening, right? but I would encourage you to reach out to your financial institution, especially if they are an authorized SBA provider, because you already have a relationship with them, and then you can help and they can help you as well. That's this PPP program. The next program is this economic injury disaster loan. This is a loan that comes with, if you are approved, a $10,000 emergency grant up front. $10,000 to pay for any business expenses. It is a grant, not a loan. Also run through the SBA. Again, this is meant to help small businesses, those with fewer than 500 individuals and employees, and you count if you are self-employed, right? Meant to help you immediately get through some of the crisis, right? All of these dollars are on a first come, first serve basis. And even though a program like PPP just opened up on Friday, there were a number of people who had applied for SBA loans in the week or two before that, that got converted into PPP loans, right? So there's a whole lot going on and a whole lot of people trying to figure this out in real time to get money to individuals. So I would encourage you to just be patient. And I know that's really hard, but just be patient because we are still making progress. This is an example of what the PPP application looks like. You can see at the top, you are instructed to check if you are a sole proprietor or part of a partnership. If you have an LLC, you would check that box. If you have an independent contractor, or if you are an independent contractor, or if you are eligible self-employed individual, you would put all of that information there. This covers some general, good, easy to answer information like contact information, your social security number or employer identification number. And then it has your average monthly payroll, right? And then it has this moment where what it's asking for is for you to kind of estimate how much you would get, or let me say this differently. So 75% of your PPP application has to be spent on payroll, right? The remaining 25% that you're applying for can be spent on office rent or utilities or other business expenses. And maybe you're someone who says, you know what, I really just care about the payroll part, right? So then you wouldn't have to do this second sort of part of the calculation. If you just want to say what your average monthly payroll is, essentially your lost income for the month, your number of employees might be 1 because it's just you, right? Then you would indicate that you are using it all for payroll, right? This is a relatively simple form. I think it's only 2 pages. It's on the SBA website, and you need to take it to a lender or get in touch with your financial institution because it is the banks that are processing this. So the SBA also has bridge loans. These are loans of up to $25,000 at 3.75%. These are not forgivable loans, but the repayment period is deferred for, I believe, 11 months. So if you are someone who has exhausted lots of other opportunities and you need some cash flow to get through, that could be an option as well. I will caution you though, it is important that you're doing some long-term modeling if you are taking out loans that need to be paid back, because you want to make sure that you are able to pay those back in a year or so, or when things kind of normalize. And we know that there are emergency grants available. The list of groups that are granting emergency grants grows on a regular basis. My advice would be to focus on your own industry within the arts, whether you are a visual artist or a performer or a musician or a sculptor or a crafter, right? Focus on your individual discipline to identify some funders within the world, and also focus on your geographic region. A lot of community foundations and local arts councils have been rallying around the individual arts community and aiming for some emergency support grants here. Again, these vary all across the country. I see a question in the chat. This person banks with a credit union. Hooray, I love credit unions. They are not participating in the SBA programs. So what do I recommend that you do? I would recommend that you reach out to the local SBDC, Small Business Development Center. I happen to know this person is based in Ohio, and there is an SBDC or an SBA office in most cities in Ohio, including Columbus, where this person is based. Through their website, you can usually set up an appointment, it will be virtual, to meet with a counselor who can direct you to a local resource or a bank that is participating. I also believe, although I have not used it myself, but I heard about it on a webinar on Friday where I was a participant, that the SBA website has a list or a way of sort of filtering and searching for participating institutions by state. That could be a good place to kind of poke around to and see if there is a nearby bank or credit union that is participating. I will also say that probably Wednesday and Thursday of last week, there were a whole lot of banks that did not want to participate in this for a long list of reasons. Many of them have gotten additional clarity around what it means to have a government guarantee for the loan, whether or not they can still make money on the interest from the loan, and how it will affect their accounting procedures and also the amount of reserves they have to keep on hand. All of which were things that the bankers were really thinking about because it affects their business. As of Wednesday and Thursday of last week, they were getting additional clarity on some of those questions and they were feeling better about it. So it is very possible that this credit union is still not participating. It's also possible that they've gotten a little bit more comfortable since you may have spoken with them eventually. So maybe just keep an eye on their website or stay in touch with them to see if anything has changed. Again, this is all kind of unfolding in real time, but you need some answers in real time as well. So I'd probably start with the SBA website to see if you can filter and find a list of participating banks in your area that might be good options. I would also suggest reaching out to the local SBA office or SBDC, Small Business Development Center, and see if you can connect with someone who can point you to a banking resource that would be a good option. So again, reaching out to your bank or credit union is a great option. You should probably be reaching out to them as well, just to ask for flexibility on any payments you might have with them for loan payments, asking if there are any other opportunities for support that they're providing. And the same is true for different organizations, trade associations you are part of, any sort of groups that you are actively or not so actively involved in. Lots of people are trying to provide resources right now, which admittedly can be a little overwhelming. So if you find yourself being overwhelmed and inundated with information, just, delete some emails for a while and come back to them when you're ready. But part of the creative industry being such a strong community means there are lots of individuals and lots of organizations trying to help. And it's okay to find the resources that are really working for you right now. I can say personally, I have found the emails from the small business development centers to be fantastic, full of lots of clarity, lots of relevant updates. There are also several special improvement districts, especially those that cater to artists, who are providing a lot of great information and support to small businesses and retailers and individual artists. So if you know of some of those, or if you're part of some of those areas, hop on their newsletters and just see what kind of information is helpful. Okay, some of the questions that came through as individuals were registering, we're going to kind of go through those now in short order. One question was, which grants should you be prioritizing? I love this question because, there's a regular answer that applies all the time, no matter what. And then there's a right now answer. So I would encourage you to find the grants that are the best fit for you and your work. And also think about leveraging your existing relationships, whether those are existing relationships with funders, maybe groups or organizations or companies that have given you grants in the past. Touch base with them, see how things are going for them, see if they are maintaining or continuing any of their funding programs, or if they're making pretty substantial adjustments. The other question that I really love as you are talking to people that you have an existing relationship with is just to ask, you know, who else should I be talking to? Many of the funders, many of the grantors know each other and maintain pretty strong relationships in the community. So they might say something along the lines of, oh, well, my foundation is prioritizing health and human services investments right now, but you should really talk to my friend so-and-so at XYZ Foundation, right? So I think leaning into those relationships is definitely okay. As you think about what this looks like, if a big part of your work is funded through grants, I think it is also important to kind of acknowledge that there might be some seriously curtailed funding that you'll be looking at in the future. And here's what I mean by that. Lots of corporations are losing money. So the corporate grant programs are probably going to be curtailed or scaled back pretty substantially. It's also possible that these funding opportunities through corporations will be redirected to support their employees or to support health and human services type investments in their communities. As you can imagine, if you are someone who runs a huge corporation and you have just laid off 60% of your workforce, you're probably not going to be doing a whole lot of public grant opportunities, right? The optics of that are just really, really not so great. So if a lot of your funding and your income does come from grants, I think you should be prepared for that to be curtailed pretty substantially. The same is true for foundations. As we know, the stock market has been a little crazy and tumultuous of late. That may continue. We shall see. I certainly don't pretend to have perfect insight into what the market is going to be doing. But if I am someone who runs a foundation and my foundation's assets are invested, as they generally are, I might be scaling back my funding simply because my investments have lost value, which means I have less available to provide in funding. So you can kind of see the domino effect unfolding for corporations and foundations, and frankly, city and state governments as well. If most of your funding is coming from a city, and that city relies on a bed tax or a hotel and motel tax to fund the arts, it wouldn't surprise me if that pot of money is going to shrink substantially. And then we continue to see it shrink and not bounce back, probably for easily 6 months, maybe more, right? So you can see the domino effect unfolding for state and city funding as well. If you live in a state that's heavily reliant on property taxes, at some point those taxes will likely be collected. And if that funds a portion of the arts, that's fantastic. But some of those collection dates might be delayed, right? Because individuals may not be able to pay their full property taxes right now. So as you think about the opportunities for funding that might be normal to your creative practice, it's easy to see how the impact of this can ripple through for a longer period than you may expect. So I'd encourage you to kind of tighten up those expenses right now, minimize them as much as possible, and be prepared for it to take a minute before the income gets back. But again, if there are funding opportunities and they make sense and there's a good alignment between you and your creative work and the opportunity, and it makes sense to pursue it, by all means, pursue it. And if there's an existing relationship, I would lean into that for sure. This question came through the chat. I'm sorry, it came through the registration in advance. And I've mentioned it, but I wanted to take a second and just acknowledge it again. A forgivable loan is one that you do not need to pay back, right? There are different terms for forgiveness. So make sure, if you are applying for a loan and you think it's forgivable, make sure you understand what the terms are. This PPP loan is forgivable as long as 75% of the proceeds are used for maintaining payroll at a comparable level to where it was before the COVID crisis, right? So each loan might have slightly different requirements for it to be forgivable, but in general, a forgivable loan is one you do not have to pay back. We like those kind of loans because essentially they turn into almost grants. So pay attention to that and definitely pursue those if there is an option there. One specific question that came through this week was, is there help for paying for unused office space? Maybe you are someone who rents space in a co-working sort of area. Maybe you have a studio space or an office space that you are paying for, but you're not allowed to enter it, either because it is shut down or it was deemed non-essential, or you're just sheltering at home and not going out and not visiting your office space, which is probably exactly what you should be doing right now. My advice would be to talk to the landlord first. Many are being flexible, which I think is really wonderful. Not all are being flexible, but many are. My understanding as well is that under the CARES Act, landlords cannot impose a late payment penalty on tenants who are unable to pay their rent because of COVID-19. So make sure your landlord isn't assessing you late payment penalties, and stay in touch with them. I have heard anecdotally some great examples about landlords who have been willing to extend the lease term, possibly by 2 months, and allow you to stay 2 extra months and pay for those months, which is good, while kind of waiving these 2 current months. That is, in my opinion, kind of the best case scenario. Other landlords are allowing individuals to make up the missed payment over the rest of the lease term. So let's say, for the sake of simple math, you have a year left on your lease term, and you pay $120 a month. Maybe you pay $100 a month, and you're not going to be able to pay anything for April and May, right? Then you would take that $100 that you missed in April and the $100 you missed in May, and pay $20 extra for the remaining 10 months on your lease term. I talked through that kind of quickly, so you might need to replay the recording to go through it. But basically, the way it works is you take what you've missed, and then you divide it by the number of months that are remaining, so that you don't have to pay the full amount in, say, June or July, or when you're ready to pay again. But instead, you pay a portion of the missed rent over time. There's also an option to break your lease. I don't know if that would be a better or a worse case scenario for you if you are paying for unused office or studio space, but it's probably not a terrible time to investigate the tenant protections that exist in your state, just to really understand what your options are and under what circumstances you might be able to break the lease without a penalty, or with a penalty that might be a better situation for you. And also remember that for this PPP loan through the SBA, right, 75% of the amount that you borrow has to be used for payroll, but the other 25% can be used for a lease or a mortgage or utilities or other essential office expenses. So depending on kind of how the math works out for you, that may be an option to help fund some rent expenses as well. I see a question in the chat that's kind of related to this. How do you know the amount of a PPP loan? That is a fantastic question. Generally, it's tied to the amount of payroll that you need to replace. So let's say you are someone and your weekly payroll or your average earnings per week is $500, right? Your monthly payroll would then be about $2,000, right? So if you wanted to borrow 2 months worth of your average payroll, your PPP borrowing would be $4,000. But maybe you say, okay, $4,000 is 2 months of payroll. What's 25% of that? That's an extra $1,000. Maybe you could use that to cover that lease payment or some utilities or other things. So in your case, you might calculate your PPP request or your application to be, say, $5,000. That's just a quick kind of back of the envelope way of figuring out what amount you might want to apply for. But it's all driven by replacing your payroll or your average earnings. The next question that came up with someone who registered was, if this continues, what's the best way to generate income? I really love this question because the same ways that you generated income before still apply. They're just a little bit different right now. So let's just back up for a second. What is it that you do? What is the unique value you bring to the world? If you can get clear on what that is for your creativity, right? I think then it's an interesting conversation to really just say, this is what I do. This is how I add value. How can I continue adding that value to those who need it? Maybe that means through new avenues like online or virtual sort of provided things. Maybe it's new customers. Maybe you are a filmmaker, and normally what you do is you see the world in an interesting way and you tell fantastic stories. And you have this skill set that enables you to craft visuals that are film-based. And maybe you say, okay, normally I would never do work for XYZ Corporation, but guess what? They're doing a lot of video work right now. Maybe I could use my skills and the value I provide to add value to their company, right? Maybe that's a trite example. I don't really know, but if you know who you are and what you do creatively and the real value that you provide, coming back to that and then thinking about how you can continue providing that in these circumstances, I think is okay. It's also okay to be really honest with yourself. If you are not in a space where you are doing anything creatively, that's okay, but that means you probably shouldn't be pursuing creative work, right? Because if you're not in a space where you can really do it well, there are probably other things you could do if you wanted to. I had a conversation with an artist, maybe about, I think it was now 2 weeks ago now, who was absolutely ecstatic to be going to work as a shelver in a sort of grocery, sort of retail setting. They were really, really excited about that particular opportunity. They were not in a space where they wanted to be making work, but they did very sort of seriously need some cash flow and income coming in. And so for them, that felt like a good choice. I think you need to be honest with yourself about what your needs are and what you're capable of doing right now. And if that's creating in a slightly different way, that's amazing. If that's creating or using your skill set for a slightly different audience, that's amazing too. If it is doing something totally unrelated to your art because you're not there right now, that is also okay. Or if it's just kind of pausing, taking care of yourself, maximizing these available resources, caring for your family and your loved ones in your community, that is also okay. I think there are different choices on the table and you get to decide what really does make the most sense for you. How are solo artists managing? This was a question from last week's chat, but I've heard a couple more updates, so I wanted to bring it back. Increasingly last week, more and more, I was hearing about motivational struggles, individuals who were really struggling with the motivation to make work because deadlines had sort of evaporated or shows had gotten canceled or other festivals or opportunities that were really sort of exciting were not happening anymore. And a lot of individuals I was talking with last week were really struggling with motivation. I think that's okay. If you are not struggling with motivation, rock on. If you are, reach out to your community, the other makers, your peers, those that you are regularly in touch with, and see about supporting each other or asking for some support. And I'm not talking about financial support. I'm just talking about kind of emotional or creative support because it's tough. And I think we'll continue to see people cycling through grief and trauma and all sorts of feelings that this brings up. This question, someone is a sole proprietor with no employees. They've never paid into unemployment. Is there help? Yes, your state now does allow you to apply for unemployment as a sole proprietor, which is great news. The systems haven't totally caught up in every state, which is not great news, but there's also that SBA support. You should be managing your cash very carefully. Keep doing the math, watch the cash flow, prioritize the expenses that you do not have a choice on. And what I mean there is really food, probably mostly food, prescriptions, other needs that you have that are not flexible. So prioritize those. And then if you have the ability to continue to pay for your other expenses, that's amazing. If you have the ability to ask for some flexibility, that's okay too, but prioritize the things that you really need to prioritize. One question that came up last week and then was repeated in this week's chat is about future budgeting. So how do you solve today's crisis and look at future budgets when there is so much uncertainty. I will relay again that all models are wrong. I am seeing such a range of estimates, and every time I reach out to peers or colleagues and say, hey, what are you estimating for income next year? Nobody has any idea. We're all just sort of going with gut instincts and preparing a range of possibilities because there's still a lot of uncertainty. So what I would encourage you to do is go funder by funder or client by client for your own situation. If you know some things have gotten canceled, but they've been rescheduled, that's great. If you know some things have gotten canceled and they might not be rescheduled and you might be looking for different opportunities next year, that's okay too. But really look at your own budget, look at your own income, maybe from last year or what you were planning for this year, and take your time to kind of go through it and make an estimate about what each funder's capability might be, knowing that it is just a guess. Are there any provisions in place for artists that have lost income? Yes, absolutely. We've hit on a couple of them. Stay tuned and keep trying to answer those questions to the best of your ability. Last week, there was a question from a teacher who has a W-2 job and a working musician. Unemployment does cover the lost performance revenue, but you do have to pay attention to your state's requirements. It is possible that your state's, the way the math works, maybe your lost income won't be enough to qualify you for unemployment, right? Especially if you still have a W-2 job. So yes, this situation is covered, and it varies on a state-by-state basis. So you just need to spend some time in the frequently asked questions section of your state's website. A second question came up this past week about purchasing a home. So I thought it was relevant to repeat the answer to this question from last week. If things have changed, you might want to go back and make sure that the loan you may have been pre-approved for or the monthly payments that you were prepared to commit to are still reasonable based on your current situation, if your income has changed or if it hasn't. Also, if you are looking at a pile of money for a down payment and you find yourself in a situation where you might need to spend some of that in the current crisis, that'll affect your down payment amount. So definitely just keep doing the math. I also really appreciated this question. Someone just submitted that they were just feeling really overwhelmed. They didn't even know what to ask. They were just feeling really overwhelmed. So I thought it might be helpful to kind of step back and put you back in a space of sort of financial wellness, right? Those of you who know me well have seen a version of this a few times before, so I apologize for being repetitive. But remember, as you're thinking through this, it is important for you to get a handle on what your costs to exist as a human are. And they're probably lower now than they are under normal times. Get a sense of that. Prioritize what you need to prioritize. Then get a sense of what it costs you to keep running your creative practice. And again, this is probably lower right now, but maybe some things have increased. Maybe you are now paying for a Zoom subscription because you're teaching guitar lessons via Zoom. Or maybe you're seeing an increase in application fees because you're applying for more things further out into the future right now. Or maybe you're feeling really motivated and you are making a lot of work, so you're investing more in your supplies. All of those things are okay, right? But get a sense of what it costs you to run your creative practice in the way you want to run it. Normally, I would also make you think about how much you're setting aside for taxes and how much you are saving right now. But in times of crisis, very often we kind of put a pause on those things. If you are in a position where you are still thinking about setting aside 30% of everything you earn for taxes, that's amazing. And if you are in a position where you are setting aside 10 to 15% of what you're earning for savings, keep doing that if you're able to do it. If you're not, forgive yourself and move on. Get a sense of your numbers, right? And hone in on what the coronavirus version of your numbers are. Then we think about different ways to monetize your creativity. We talk about starring role, which is kind of your main thing that you love doing, that is the most fulfilling. And in one version of a perfect world, you would get to do that all the time. And you have all of these skills that can contribute to supporting cast roles, which are related to your starring role, but not necessarily the main thing. Maybe this is the filmmaker who's going to pivot and start serving bankers who are trying to video conference with their clients right now, right? Supporting cast role. It's maybe not what you always dreamed about, but it is an opportunity to monetize your skills and continue to add value as you're getting through this. And then of course, production assistance work is that third category. That's the work that is temporary and repeatable and stable. The artist I mentioned that I talked to that took a warehouse restocking job and was ecstatic about it, this is that for that person, production assistance work, right? And for him, it took all of the pressure off of everything else he was supposed to be doing, right? That's okay. There is no perfect model of how these roles kind of come together or how you should spend your time in any one of these. But if you remember that you've got this framework with these different opportunities, that can kind of help you reorganize how you're thinking about monetizing your creativity or monetizing your skills. And then of course, on the other side of the equation, we've got assets. Those are the things we have: house, car, checking account, savings account, retirement account. And we have liabilities, student loan payments. Federal student loan payments have been deferred, right? Which is wonderful, but you still have that big balance that exists, right? Credit card debt, maybe it's a car debt, maybe it's a mortgage, maybe you borrowed money to buy a $20,000 camera, so you have a small business loan, right? Keep an eye on all of these different debt balances that you have, just so that you still have an awareness of them, because you need to continue making payments on those debts, especially when things settle down and we return to some predictability and those payments start kicking in again. But it's also important that you continue to accumulate assets again when things get back to normal, so that you can build wealth and restore that emergency fund, so that the next time something crazy happens, because there will be a next time, even if it won't be exactly this version of the crazy, you'll have a little bit of emergency fund to get you through the 2 or 3 weeks it takes for the state unemployment systems to catch up and be open to receive payments, or the couple of weeks it takes for the IRS to disperse a stimulus payment. You'll have that little bit of breathing room, which is why we do what we do. You can control a handful of things as part of this: your spending, the conversations you're having, the creativity you're using to find solutions, and also care for yourself, and what you do with your time. So if that means increasing self-care and decreasing the amount of news updates, that's fantastic. If that's not working for you because you're waking up in the middle of the night, that's okay too. You know what you need. Take care of yourself. And remember, there is a whole lot you cannot control. There is just a brief list of things you cannot control right there. Keep your energy focused on what you can control to keep taking care of yourself. That's our recap for the week. It is still going to be okay. I promise we will continue having these conversations as long as individuals keep wanting to have them. So I will look forward to seeing you next week and answering more of your questions. Definitely step back, take some deep breaths, care for yourself this week, and we'll be in touch. Thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Elaine.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. That was
You're
great.
welcome. Good. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thanks, Jillian.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm. Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Anna. I appreciate all your messages in the chat.
Thank you, Elaine.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. My pleasure. Enjoy.
Take care.
Bye. Kate, are you still here? Nope, no more Kate. Oh, good. I'm glad you're still here, Kate. So that's a great question. Independent contractor, applied for unemployment, you're pending, I'm sorry. Can you still apply for PPP and drop UI? I would, honestly. I don't think that's a bad option at all. What state are you in, Kate? Oh, you're in New York. Okay. So Believe it or not, I haven't looked into New York's unemployment, but yeah, I would go ahead and apply for PPP. And here's why I say that. The PPP money is going to be first come, first served, whereas unemployment might continue a little bit longer. So if unemployment is pending for you, go ahead and apply for PPP. You can always drop it if you want, or return the money. And yeah, that's probably what I would do. You're welcome, Kate. Terry, great question. Do you need to file your 29 income taxes before you receive stimulus funds? No. The IRS will look at either 2019 or 2018. If you have not filed either, then you do need to get one of those in to get the stimulus funds. But let's say you filed 2018, you do not need to file 2019. The IRS will look at your 2018 return, which is great. Now, because I know you a little bit, it's interesting to think about those limits for adjusted gross income. So let's say you had a fantastic 2019 and you and your spouse would be far over that adjusted gross income level. That means you would not get any stimulus money for 2019. Don't file, right? Especially if 2018 is a little bit lower and would put you in a position where you were eligible for stimulus money based on your 2018 adjusted gross income. If the reverse were true and 2018 was like an epically good year for you, but 2019 was maybe not so great, in that case, you would want to go ahead and file 2019 because the IRS will look at the most recent tax return on file, either 2018 or 2019, to see what you would be eligible for. You're so welcome. Good luck.